welcome and thank you for coming to this briefing. We're expecting more folks to file in, so just it's informal. Grab some food when you can and have a seat. I am fairly new to Conservation International. It's a great organization, almost 900 staff worldwide. We work in more than 40 countries, doing very cool conservation projects around the world. Lots of literature out there on the table about CI. The purpose here today is to address the global biodiversity crisis that CI is heavily engaged in. The crisis seems neglected on Capitol Hill with the focus on climate change and the oil spill occupying the agency's times, and there just hasn't been enough attention. So that's the purpose of this briefing, is to try to bring the attention back. There's a number of hugely important international initiatives that are going on that we want to discuss today. 2010 is the UN's International Year of Biodiversity. There are many things that the United States of America can continue to do to be engaged beyond 2010, and some of those initiatives and some of those opportunities are what we're going to talk about today. So a few announcements before we get started. Put your cell phones on stun, please, so that you get stunned if your cell phone rings. Help yourself to food. There should be plenty. And literature buttons. We got these nice buttons. Take one, please, if you know folks who want one. And there's extras out there. Grab them on your way out. As far as some thanks are needed. First, from Conservation International, Darcy Smith and Carolyn Hicks for doing the organization. Thank you very much. And with the International Conservation Caucus Foundation, who really did much of the organization for this briefing. It's been invaluable to have the help of John Forrester, and his staff. It's been absolutely great. And also with Carolyn Mack with the EPW committee for helping us to get this room. And then Jeanette Lyman and Senator Tom Udall's staff for also helping with the sponsorship of this and getting the room together. And finally to Senator Udall himself for agreeing to come and give some welcoming remarks. Senator Udall is the Senate co-chair of the International Conservation Caucus Foundation. He's a great friend of international conservation, and I lived in New Mexico for 8 years where he was my Attorney General and then Senator, so I was proud to be a constituent. So please welcome Senator Udall. Thanks.
Peter, thank you very much for that nice introduction, and thank you all today for coming to learn more about biodiversity. We've got an incredible group of speakers here for you today, and I want to first of all say special thanks to Conservation International and other partners for organizing this opportunity to refocus on biodiversity. Before I turn the microphone over, I want to share a few of my own thoughts about biodiversity and the importance of international conservation. As our world grows increasingly intertwined through commerce, communication, and culture, we also work together to protect the Earth's natural resources through conservation. The natural wealth of biodiversity in the world has an awe-inspiring impact on our culture, our experiences, and our imaginations. As a nation, we engage in global conservation efforts that save species, establish parks, and preserve landscapes. But conservation of natural resources is about much more than that. It's about democracy building, it's about stabilizing economies, reducing conflicts, and maintaining clean and healthy environments. Competing needs around the world tax natural resources that are vital to human survival. For example, 500 million people in developing countries depend on fresh water from natural areas that are under threat of degradation. And 2 billion people depend on rapidly diminishing fish stocks for a significant source of their daily protein. In contrast, wild species provide more than 300 billion in protection and benefit to world agriculture. Those benefits include natural pest control and the pollination of 2/3 of crop species that feed the world. Forests prevent catastrophic flooding and severe drought, and coral reefs and mangroves reduce the impact of large storms on coastal populations saving $9 billion in damages each year and reducing outlays for disaster assistance. As natural resources are polluted and depleted throughout the world, economies are threatened and conflicts begin to emerge. The United States National Intelligence Council expects that demographic trends and natural resource scarcities relating to water, food, arable land, and energy sources will lead to instabilities and conflicts in the years ahead. With such threats looming, Senator Brownback and I introduced the Global Conservation Act, which I believe Jeff Wise on the panel will mention and talk about here, and so there's no need for me to go into great depth. But just as an overview, this legislation recognizes the intrinsic link between communities, conflict, and natural resources, and it looks to a future of local involvement in the preservation of natural resources for the benefit of international communities. The bill establishes conservation as a fundamental element in economic development, conflict mitigation, and an adaptation to climate change, and it mandates a comprehensive national strategy for global conservation with clear goals, benchmarks, and lines of accountability. As our nation continues to strengthen its participation in the global community, it is essential that we promote strong international biodiversity conservation initiatives focusing on preserving the richness of biodiversity around the world and on the involvement and support of local communities. And Russ, I can't tell you how much I learned being with you in Madagascar. I see Russ has a new book out here on the table called The Lemurs of Madagascar. I went to Madagascar with him and was out there and saw that interaction of the local communities and the environment and conservation and how important it is. And just one final comment on the really, really big picture to step back from these few comments that I've said. I view this as the biodiversity. We are in really the fight of our lives to preserve the planet. Because if you go back to the Big Bang, 3.5 billion years ago, the world has been getting more and more and more diverse. And now we are at the point in time where with global warming and the human activities that are a part of global warming and fueling that, we're about ready to turn the tide back the other way, where we become less diverse, where the large predator fish in the sea are dying, where the numbers of species as a result of global warming are going to be reduced in some cases by a quarter or a third or maybe perhaps even up to 1/2. So this is something that is big. There's a lot at stake, and I think you're going to learn a lot from this panel today about what we can do about it and how we all need to engage. So with that, Peter, I'm going to turn it back to you. I'm sorry. I would love to stay and listen to all of this panel. We have a vote coming up, and then we go right into our caucus. We're trying to wrap things up, but I'm sorry I'm going to have to excuse myself. But all of these books that Russ has, and it looks like others have books out there, you should read them all. They are great. I'm not trying to do a book promotion or anything, but they're terrific books, and this is an issue that I think is as people learn more and more about it, they're going to be passionate about saving the planet and making sure that the planet we live on is a planet that's biodiverse in incredible ways. So thank you very much.
Okay, great. Well, fantastic. So let me introduce Russ Mittermeier. He's the president of Conservation International. I actually could spend the whole program just reading an introduction about him. His resume is so long, but I got to hit the highlights here. He's been the president since 1989. He was named by Time as one of the heroes of the planet. He's regarded as a world leader in the field of biodiversity and tropical forest conservation. He's a world-famous primatologist who's traveled widely in more than 140 countries and done field research in more than 20 countries, much of it focusing on the Amazon, but also the Atlantic forest region of Brazil and Madagascar. His work in these countries continues, and I think it's, we at CI say it's fair to say that Russ is the only active field biologist who's also the head of a major international conservation organization while he does that work. He, since 1977, Russ has served as chairman of the IUCN Species Survival Commission Primate Specialist Group, and he's been a member of the steering committee of the Species Survival Commission since 1985. The IUCN is the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and he was elected as one of the 4 IUCN vice presidents for the term from 2009 to 2012. So extremely influential on the international conservation scene, and let me turn it over to Russ.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to speak from over here because the PowerPoint cord isn't long enough to reach the podium. I wonder if we can turn the lights off because the screen is kind of small. Am I blocking someone's view here? Would you rather I sat down? No? It's okay? Guess we can't do the lights, huh? Oh, we can. Okay, what I'm going to do in this presentation is talk about biodiversity conservation in general, a little bit about priorities, challenges, and some of the opportunities. And of course, I'm going to make special reference to the upcoming Convention on Biological Diversity, which is going to start in just about 2 weeks. I was just in Japan last week doing some advance media for the meeting, and I'm very, very impressed with the way the Japanese have organized. I think this is going to be the greatest meeting of the Biodiversity Convention ever. Now, I always like to start, as you've already seen, with some pictures of non-human primates, because as Peter mentioned, I'm a primatologist by background, and I spent the better part of the last 40 years running around the rainforests of the Amazon, the Atlantic Forest region of Brazil, Madagascar, and many other places. And I think by now I've probably been, in one way or another, in more rainforests than just about anyone else. So my perspective is very much that of a field biologist who's been out there on the front lines in conservation for a long time. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is say a little bit about what biodiversity is, some of the threats to conserving biodiversity, how we as an organization set priorities. There are a variety of different priority setting mechanisms out there. I'm just going to highlight the one that we use, biodiversity hotspots in particular. I'll talk a little bit about Madagascar, which is kind of a microcosm of what's happening in some of these highest priority areas. A little on the involvement of the private sector, which we consider to be critical, climate change and biodiversity, and then I'll finish up with some recommendations very briefly on some of the one of the key targets in particular that among the 20 that are being identified for the Biodiversity Convention this coming month. So what is biodiversity? Well, a number of definitions. I like to use that wealth of genes, species, ecosystems, and ecological processes that make our living planet what it is. It's the sum total of all life on Earth. It's our living legacy to future generations. And what often doesn't get said is that it's also the basic underpinning of sustainable development. Just a few facts about biodiversity, how little we still know. We have about 1.9 million species in all recognized by science. This is plants, animals, microorganisms, everything. But the estimates of total diversity run from 5 to 10 to 30 million or more, and the most recent studies indicate that it's probably going to come out to about 10 million. This means we're just about an order of magnitude off in terms of our understanding of the rest of life on Earth. And it's not just the tropical forest canopy beetles in the rainforests of the Amazon or deep sea microorganisms. It's actually our closest living relatives that we're still relatively ignorant about as well. This is a species of marmoset monkey that I described from the Brazilian Amazon in 1992. This is a new genus of monkey that we described in 1996. And these are just two of more than 50 species that have been described since 2000, more than 80 species since 1990. So we're still in an age of discovery and understanding of other life forms on this planet. Why do we care about biodiversity? Well, we have the intrinsic value, the moral imperative of conserving other life forms, the aesthetic value, the enormous cultural value. Virtually every culture in the world has a strong association with wildlife. The economic value of species. Really, biodiversity is the raw material for biotechnology. We have this extremely exciting new field of biomimicry, which I could give a whole presentation on. I'm not going to go into any detail on it now. The importance of wild relatives of crop species for agriculture, the rapidly growing ecotourism industry, and really of great importance now is this whole issue of ecosystem services, forests and fresh water, watersheds, pollination services, disaster prevention, and forests and climate. This started to get a lot of attention with the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment about a decade ago. A number of books have been published on this issue. We did a book called The Wealth of Nature. I have a copy here for anyone who's interested, and if you would like to get a copy, just leave your business card with Peter at the end and we'll send you one. And the essence of all of this is that biodiversity, healthy ecosystems, underpin ecosystem services. The ecosystem services are derived from these living systems, and these are essential for human well-being. One of the most important studies ever is about to be launched in Nagoya, and that is T, the economics of ecosystem services and biodiversity. Pieces of this have already come out, but the whole thing is going to be launched in Nagoya, and this is an extremely important document replete with examples of how biodiversity is critical for ecosystem services and how these services are essential for human well-being. So what are the threats to biodiversity? Well, there are many. I rate large-scale industrial agriculture like oil palm and this shot from Borneo as being one of the principal problems. Slash and burn agriculture still in many parts of the world. Timber extraction in the tropical rainforest, both legal and illegal. Firewood and charcoal production. Huge hydroelectric projects flooding vast areas of natural habitat. And this very insidious threat of bushmeat hunting, especially in parts of Central and West Africa, but in other parts of the world as well. And this enormous wildlife trade going mainly to China, which really is just sucking all sorts of wildlife out of many, many parts of Asia, but also increasingly in other parts of the world as well. We also have the issue of invasive species, both plants and animals. This is an invasive vine taking over a forest in southern Madagascar, and this is a critically important issue, especially in small islands. And we have global climate change, which is a major threat, but as I'll say a little bit later, potentially an opportunity for us as well. So we're facing an impending extinction crisis. We're losing species, we're losing forests and other habitats, and we're seeing the erosion of these critical ecosystem services. Just one example, and I'll keep using primate examples here because this is a well-documented group and a group that I know well, and I think it's symbolic. A recent assessment by IUCN's Species Survival Commission indicated that 1 in every 3 species of non-human primates, about 670 different kinds in all, is either in the critically endangered or endangered state, which means that they could disappear in the next 5 to 10 to 20 years if rapid action is not taken. So at Conservation International, we've always felt the need to be strategic and set priorities based on the best available science. All biodiversity is important. All nations should do everything possible to conserve their living resources. But as it turns out, biodiversity is not evenly distributed over the face of the planet. It's heavily concentrated in a relatively small area, and a large portion of the area where you have the highest concentrations of life forms have been heavily impacted by human activities. And as it turns out, these areas also happen to have some of the highest ecosystem service values and are therefore especially valuable in terms of human well-being, which provides us with many potential win-win situations. We use 2 main priority-setting categories. One is hotspots, and the other is high biodiversity wilderness areas. I'm going to focus, in the interest of time, just on the hotspots today. This is a concept that was developed back in 1988. We've revised it a number of times. I have our most recent book on hotspots here, and again, if you're interested in getting a copy of one of these publications, please give us your card at the end of the presentation. What hotspots are all about is prioritizing areas of high irreplaceability as measured by endemic species, species found nowhere else, and a high degree of threat. According to the latest analysis, we have 35 of these. Here they are in red. They're located mainly in the tropics, but not exclusively. All of the Mediterranean-type systems are also on the hotspots list. The original extent was about 16% of Earth's land surface. This is an area about equivalent to Russia and Australia put together. Nearly 90% lost over the past century. What remains is about 2.3% of Earth's land surface, a little over 3 million square kilometers. That's an area the size of India or the 5 largest American states put together. In this 2.3%, you have concentrated as endemic species found nowhere else, more than 50% of all plants, more than 40% of all non-fish vertebrates. And if you want to look at the most endangered species using the IUCN's red list of threatened species, you see that for birds, it's over 80% in the hotspots. For mammals, over 80%. For amphibians, 90% of the most threatened are concentrated in these areas. My favorite example, really the icon of the hotspots, is the island of Madagascar, located about 400 kilometers off the east coast of Africa, isolated from other land masses for at least 90 million years, and really evolved very much in isolation. great variety of different habitat types, rainforest, dry forests like these giant baobab forests, and this unique desert system in the southern part of the country which has 95% plant endemism just within Madagascar. 14 to 15,000 plant species, that's almost as much as all of North America north of Mexico, an area that's more than 30 times larger. But what really has attracted many people to Madagascar is this amazing radiation of non-human primates, the lemurs. 5 families, 15 genera, 101 species, and they're all endemic to that country. And this uniqueness of families and genera indicates that it's not just species we're talking about, it's also deep evolutionary lineages that we're concerned about conserving, and also, this is also the case for many of the other hotspots as well. And again, in terms of new discoveries, in 1994 we did the first ever field guide to the lemurs. We had 50 species. In 2006 we redid it, we had 71. We just published a couple of weeks ago the latest edition, we have 101 species. So we basically doubled the fauna, the primate fauna in this country in 16 years. Unfortunately, Madagascar is also a global leader in habitat destruction. More than 90% is lost. Much of the country looks like this landscape of erosion. Every year the rivers run red with eroded soil, so really eliminating a lot of Madagascar's future agricultural potential. Hunting is a problem as well. And Madagascar is one of those examples, along with Australia, New Zealand, Hawaiian Islands, of recent extinctions. We're not talking about the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. We're talking about things that disappeared in the last 100, 200, 500, at most 2,000 years ago. Here you have the largest of the living species, silhouetted in black, an animal called the Indri. And you have this whole array of giant lemur species that disappeared just in the last few hundred years. Amazing recent extinctions, and so this indicates really that this is a very real phenomenon that we have to deal with. In many ways, Madagascar is the world's highest conservation priority, but what's happening there is happening in many of these other regions as well. And as always, politics plays a role. We had been about to declare Madagascar a success story, or at least an incipient one, at the end of 2008, 2009. There was a revolution. This young man, who was the mayor of the capital city, took over. And at this point in time, almost 2 years later, no other country in the world recognizes his government. So we have to continue working in spite of this really political vacuum that we're facing right now. The bottom line, hotspots are the top priority in terrestrial biodiversity conservation. If we fail in the hotspots, we're going to lose a major portion of the world's terrestrial biodiversity, regardless of how successful we are in other areas. As it turns out, these areas are also important for other reasons. Many of our major agricultural commodities are grown in the hotspots, coffee being one good example. They very much coincide with the so-called Vavilov centers, which are the centers of diversity of cultivated plant species. And very interesting, very high degree of human cultural diversity as measured by human language is found in these priority areas for biodiversity. Half of the world's languages, including some of the most endangered, spoken by a few dozen or a few hundred people, are concentrated in these areas. So working in these areas really provides us with a number of win-win situations. That's at a global level. What about at the site level? Well, we've got a concept called key biodiversity areas, which has been in use now for about a decade, looking at the specific sites that are very high priority. This builds on the amazing work done by BirdLife International in identifying important bird areas. And really the tip of the iceberg is what's called the Alliance for Zero Extinction Sites. These are the individual sites, the single sites, that are the only home to critical and endangered species. The loss of that site will result in the extinction of those species that are found only there. That's largely terrestrial. There's also an awful lot of biodiversity in the marine realm. You can see from this map, which shows concentrations of marine diversity, very heavy concentrations in the coral triangle, that as with the hotspots in the terrestrial realm, you have very strong concentrations of marine life as well. I'm not going to go into that now in the interests of time, but obviously we have to focus a great deal of attention on the marine realm as well. The private sector, major partners, we've believed in the need to work with the private sector very strongly because they are such a determinant of what happens in the world. We've had relationships with many corporations for a long time, including some of the largest like Walmart, which has really been a leader in bringing biodiversity and other environmental considerations into their work. And what about global climate change? Well, as I said earlier, it's obviously a major threat, but it's also a unique opportunity. If we look at what the focus on climate change up until fairly recently has been very heavily on energy, vehicle emissions, industry, biofuels, and so forth. But until just about 3 or 4 years ago, there wasn't much attention to the role of forests, particularly tropical forests. But we know that at least 17% of emissions are coming from the burning and degradation of tropical forests, which puts Indonesia and Brazil really in the top 4 emitters on the planet. So it stands to reason that if burning of these forests is a significant contributor to greenhouse gases, then we need to avoid deforestation, and now we have this new mechanism called RED, Reduction in Emissions from Deforestation and Degradation. It was one of the few things that came out relatively intact from the disaster in Copenhagen last December. And in Copenhagen, there was $3.5 billion in commitments for RED+. There's the potential of $30 billion or more over the next decade. And the vast majority of the tropical forests that would benefit from RED+ investments will be hotspots and high biodiversity wilderness areas, this other category of priority. So I think there's a real opportunity now to bring the interests of these 2 conventions, which were born in Rio de Janeiro almost 20 years ago, to bring them together and to come up with more common agendas. Some countries are really taking a lead in integrating RED into green economies. Guyana, a small country in northern South America, is one example. They've done such a good job on this that the government of Norway has committed $250 million over 5 years to enable them to implement their strategy. Norway's just been stellar in all of this. In addition to what they're doing with Guyana, they're putting $1 billion into Brazil's Amazon Fund, $1 billion into Indonesia. They are really going above and beyond the call in terms of their commitment. This is the president of Guyana with Harrison Ford, who's one of our board members, and Harrison he's very interested in these issues, and he's just committed to come to Nagoya, which we're very happy about. Last, a little bit on the convention itself, the targets. There are 20 targets that have been identified so far. We've worked closely with IUCN on recommendations on how to strengthen these targets. If anyone is interested in this document, I'll be happy to provide it to you. I just want to focus on one in particular, and that is the one that relates to protected areas and recognition of the fundamental importance of protected areas. Protected areas are simply the most important tool we have for achieving biodiversity conservation and ensuring the continued flow of ecosystem services. At this point in time, Target 11, which deals with protected areas, is saying 15% should be the target overall. We're recommending that it be 25% for terrestrial because we're already at 12.2%, and many countries are already above 25. And for the marine realm, marine protected area coverage is still under 1%. We think the 15% number is good for marine. So we hope that we can get major commitments from countries on this target. South America already, 22.7% as a continent, so this is not an unrealistic goal. And very important, especially in South America and some of the other countries, some of the other regions of the world, the importance of indigenous people. These are the Kayapo people, which we work closely with in the Brazilian Amazon. 6,000 people living in an area of 11.5 million hectares. It's an area the size of the state of Virginia. They live in these tiny little villages scattered throughout this region, and they're protecting some of the most important rainforests left on Earth. So in conclusion, we have a historic opportunity to ensure the long-term health of our planet and the survival of all life on Earth, but we have only a brief window of opportunity in which to come up with some truly lasting solutions. We need to move very quickly, we need to be positive, optimistic, and we need to take on a very ambitious agenda. The Japanese government has proposed that this coming decade be the International Decade of Biodiversity, which we're very supportive of. But more than anything else, we need the United States. The United States is still not a signatory to the biodiversity, not a ratifier, signatory they are, not a ratifier of the Biodiversity Convention, along with Andorra and the Vatican, the only other countries that have not ratified the convention. It's a bit embarrassing for those of us who are American citizens working in this, on this issue. We really need to have the USA on board. The U.S. government does a lot for biodiversity conservation, $288 million last year in this publication that we produced jointly with several other organizations on the international conservation budget. And of course, American philanthropy is unmatched. But we really need the U.S. to be part of this global convention as well. So with that, I think I'll end. And again, very much appreciate the interest all you have in this critically important issue. We look forward to working together with all of you. And please, if any of you are interested in any of these publications, please let us know and we'll send them to you free of charge.